Hi, this is Jim Cranston from 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com, the podcast and website about reimagining your life. Thanks for joining me today to talk about kindness. So let's get started. If you like what you hear today, please leave a like, subscribe, tell your friends, send me a message. Thanks for joining me tonight to talk about kindness in a very general sense. Yes, we all know that we should be kind to other people, but especially these days, a lot of people on both sides of the political, national, and international arenas seem to think that common courtesy and kindness is something you only give to someone who meets your own special set of qualifications and requirements. I hear and see people who really should definitely know better casually maligning huge swaths of the population because they don't feel they agree with their own self beliefs in some way. Besides just making for a cranky society, this sort of selective inclusion, exclusion, a combination thereof, of who deserves basic decency, undermines society in many public and private ways. The news is always busy telling us who we should not care about, often in terms that are they're totally blatant, frankly. And we're often told that we should be celebrating someone's bad behavior because the other people deserved it. As I've mentioned before, I'm a certified wilderness first responder. And that kind of goes, it doesn't kind of go, it definitely goes well beyond a typical first responder training. Just kind of for reference, it's a 2 week training course. I have regular refreshers required to stay current and things like that. And recently I observed a medical emergency situation, so I stopped because it's kind of required. And it was a gentleman I had seen a short while earlier, and he had collapsed for unknown reasons. So shortly after I arrived, the gentleman was alert and responsive, and two other people were watching over him, and I heard sirens coming, so there really was very little need for any further involvement on my part. I stayed for just a moment to see if any medical history or questions were going to come up because I had seen him earlier and I knew a little bit of medical history about him, kind of. And but just kind of hung around for a minute. And the first person to arrive was a police officer, and I presume the 911 call was for medical assistance. And so, what do you think the very first words were out of the officer's mouth? Do you have ID? No introduction, no asking about the medical condition, nothing. Do you have ID? Oh, I forgot to mention the subject was speaking Spanish. So, of course, they're presumed guilty in today's world. I know a lot of people in the Spanish community, most of whom are in the US totally legally, many of whom are citizens. But now it's considered appropriate to demand to see papers in many situations for the crime of either speaking Spanish or speaking with a Spanish accent. It's also okay to harass these people if you're a passerby or people in the checkout line, whatever, seem to feel they have just carte blanche to say whatever they want. So how can people who talk about what a great and free constitutional republic the US is do this when their actions undermine every single aspect of the principles this country was founded upon? It's easy, and we've talked about it before. First, you have to label the presumed group by some recognizable characteristic: color of their skin, accent, religion, style of dress, anything recognizable will do. Wearing a yarmulke? Clearly an enemy, deserving a label. Speaking one of a number of foreign languages? Again, another enemy, deserving of a label. And most importantly, since we can describe you by a label, there's no need to consider you as a human. Thus, magically, it removes the need for kindness. I was tempted to ask the officer if I had been sitting on the curb, a reasonably dressed white guy, would they have started the conversation with, "Do you have ID?" Or would it have been more like, "Are you okay, sir?" But if the subject of your speech is in one of the many labeled groups, there's no need to treat someone with respect nor kindness. So that's certainly kind of a current worldwide problem. What does that have to do with us? Well, it's so pervasive that we have to be careful to not get up in doing it ourselves, even as a backlash from how we feel others are treating us. The news on both sides of the political spectrum has no problem labeling 49% of the country as whatever subhuman label they think they can get away with. Maybe it drives up ratings, but also drives a huge wedge into the coherency of our society. On a personal level, we may find ourselves casually dismissing large swaths of the population because, well, now it just seems kind of natural to do so. You have to remain aware of it and try and stop yourself from doing it. As we have often said, we have far more in common with each other than we have in difference. And very few talking points raise themselves to being worthy of alienating others in the pursuit of your own perfect principles. That's why it's so important to talk to other people, especially people who you don't totally agree with, and even some people you totally disagree with. You probably won't end up as good buddies, but hopefully at least one of you understands where the emotion and angst is coming from the other person. This becomes even more important as we age. As we get older, we sometimes tend to kind of get fearful of the newer foreign ideas, and this tends to lead us down a path of isolation. Coupled with social media and so many news sources, it's easy to box ourselves into this kind of little ghetto of similar viewpoints and end up fearing them or all of the different thems. Reaching out to other people socially, like say if you plan a lunch and end up near someone else with a differing viewpoint, well, try and listen with curiosity and perhaps learn something. If you're asked to defend your point of view, do it with empathy and facts, not hearsay and accusations. Always work from a point of view of understanding. It really does change how the conversation goes. If somebody says something snarky, you don't have to reply in kind or even up the ante. You can just ignore it and move on. If they're at all perceptive, they'll realize exactly what's going on, and hopefully they'll learn something from that. We only have one world and one life to live on this particular go-round of our world. We should try and make the most of it, not isolate ourselves into trying to make the least of it. The very practical side of this is as we age, and I know this not only firsthand, but from watching my mother for many years, I cared for her. But as we age, our pool of friends who have similar thoughts continues to shrink. Kind of like, oops, it's just one of the facts of life. People who are our peers, not all of us die at the same time. And some of us who live longer, well, you have fewer people who are your age. My mother was a master having conversation without confrontation. By the time she passed away, she was probably on her third or fourth set of friends because she kept outliving her previous friends. But she knew how to see the good in people and ignore the aspects she didn't care for. She recognized that we all have things in common and things in difference. But that's part of the wonder of life. Just like everything in this world, what happens has no real emotion attached to it. The emotion arises when our brain interprets an unemotional event. We've talked about this. We're going to go through it again in the next couple of weeks probably. But remember the whole scheme of things. Some situation happens, you perceive it, then you recognize it and add emotion to it. There's a real time lapse in there. It's up to you what kind of emotion you want to attach to an event, because that helps you decide how you're going to respond to a situation or to a person. You can make baseless assumptions from what you've been told, or you can be curious and open-minded. Being closed and judgmental may seem like the safer path, but it really is hurting you by all the perspective and joy that you're missing. By daring to be open and be willing to try and judge everyone as a person and not just a label, you open up your world in ways you might not expect. So that's it for the evening. Your homework tonight is to think about the first thoughts that come into your mind when you see a stranger. What labels did you use? So you're walking down the street, you see somebody, say, ooh, I remember my homework. What did I just think about that person? Did you use a label? If you, or did you not use a label? If you did use a label, whatever, by presumed political party, nationality, language, race, education level, the way that whatever they dress, how they dress, anything. You just labeled them somehow. Now think of two things. Where did that label come from? And how else could you have perceived them? Extra points if, despite your initial reaction, if the situation permits it, and it just kind of, flows into the situation, introduce yourself, say hi, and see if a conversation can follow and what you might learn from that. You might be surprised, and hopefully in a good way. that's it again. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining me. As always, remember there's many wars in the world. Just some just very bad situations going on right now. UKR7 links to ways you can donate to the people of Ukraine. Definitely need it right now for reasons I'm not going to go into. Probably you're quite familiar with them. And then also across the world and around the world, worldcentralkitchen.org, wck.org. Work in anytime, pretty much anytime there's natural disaster, they're on the ground helping people. They do amazing things. Both great organizations, worldcentralkitchen.org. But if you don't want to donate to somebody on an international basis, I'll guarantee probably around in your own neighborhood, in your own area, there's other people that can use help always. And if you just don't want to make a donation, you're not that kind of person, you're just kind of like, well, I just don't feel that giving money to organizations is what I want to do. Remember, you can always make somebody's day nicer just by, when you see them, say, good morning, how you doing? A friendly smile, whatever it is. Those little things, by thinking outside of yourself and seeing someone else, helps you to empathize with them, understand the world at a much better level. So you can donate ukr7.org, ukr7.com, wck.org. Two great ways. Just make somebody's day a little better with a smile is also a great way to do it. Remember, one of the best ways to care for yourself is to care for others. So as always, thank you for stopping by. If you found something interesting or useful, please pass it along, and please subscribe and hit that like button. If not, please drop me a comment as to what you'd like to hear. Have a great week. Remember to live the life that you dreamed of, because that's the path to true contentment. Love and encouragement to everyone. See you next week on 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com. Thank you so much.